Afternoon. I'd like to welcome the Health and Human Services and Aging Committee, Wednesday, September 20th. It's 1 o'clock on the dot. I'd like to have a roll call, please.
Ms. Conwell?
Yes, here.
Mr. Tuma?
Here.
Ms. Baker?
Here.
Ms. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
And Mr. Brady is also in attendance. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Has anyone, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk, been for public comment related to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, no one is signed in.
All right. Hopefully the committee members have had a second to look at the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the September 13th meeting?
Second. Motion.
First motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes have been approved from the September 13th meeting. Matters referred to the committee today are none, but we do have a very important presentation by our new Chief Executive Officer from the Adams Board, which is Ms. Valeria Harper. And these are matters that impact Cuyahoga County, and we look forward to this presentation, and I hope you look forward to many questions from us since we are entering a new budget cycle. Thank you. Please come forward.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
County Councilwoman Conwell and members of the esteemed Health, Human Service, and Aging Committee. I first want to thank you for allowing time this afternoon on your agenda for me to make a very brief and deliberate presentation this afternoon as the incoming Chief Executive Officer for the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board. I do want to offer just a couple of disclaimers. How about that? Today is my 52nd day, and I'm very proud to be in this position. I have tenure with the Adams Board, and I'm excited to now lead a team of outstanding individuals. I also like to, as part of that disclaimer, indicate to you that when I become a little more talkative than normal, it's usually rooted in the passion that I have for the job that I've been at for in excess of 30 years. So I would like to introduce just very quickly team members of mine who have come for, I hope, support and not heckling, and that would be our Chief Financial Officer, or perhaps you gentlemen would like to introduce yourselves.
Please come up to the podium. We're recording.
Thank you.
I'm Frank Brickner, the CFO for the Adams Board.
Good afternoon, Scott Osicki, Chief of External Affairs for the Adams Board.
Last but not least,
Good afternoon. I'm John Garrity. I'm the Chief Quality Officer for the Adams Board.
Dr. John Garrity. He's very modest about his PhD. What you have in front of you is a packet of material that was deliberately put together to emphasize this afternoon programs and services. So the information before you is a snapshot of the various programs and services that are made possible through the generous funding and continuous support from the Health and Human Service Levy. The other disclaimer is that I am not a techie. So I hope that I'm on pace with the PowerPoint, consistent with my notes. If not, I'll be asking Mr. Scott Osicki to help me with this presentation. And last but not least, I do perspire quite a bit when I'm in front of such important individuals in a presentation, so please don't mind the drips as long as I don't short out the laptop. We should be in good shape. So having said that, I'll roll right in. Before you in your packet of material is our mission statement. And while this is a very lawful and mission statement because it's rooted primarily in Ohio Revised Code as well as the Administrative Code, but more importantly, what it represents, while it's very challenging to implement, is evidence of us continuing to work in partnership with over 60 contract providers together as we enhance our behavioral health system of care to promote the confidence that we have by evidence that treatment works, people recover, people become stable. You'll see as a list of the services, just in very broad categories, the crisis intervention, detoxification under our new change in environment will be known as withdrawal management, prevention, wellness, treatment, pharmacological. In our new environment, it will still be called pharmacological. Residential, which is broad, vocational, recovery, peer, and education. I want to emphasize that the talking points that I'm sharing, I want to emphasize that the information this afternoon that I'm sharing with you may not necessarily illustrate all of the services, because that would take more than 5 hours to brag, especially in the way in which I present. The PowerPoint will include vital information, critical information, but I will oftentimes be driven by, again, my passion to talk about various services that may not actually appear as part of the points in the presentation. So let's get started. The outpatient treatment for mental health, this is divided in mental health services, substance use, or alcohol and other drug treatment services for this afternoon. Outpatient under mental health is inclusive of all of the popular areas that most individuals are aware of. Assessment, that's your intake typically. Counseling, could be a group or individual. Now, community psychiatric supportive treatment, most commonly known as case management. And then again, you see where pharmacological management appears. These are considered our core services within an outpatient treatment modality. We want to again emphasize, and I'll probably say this 3 or 4 times throughout the presentation, that treatment works and people do recover. In outpatient treatment programs for mental health for children and adolescents, it's important to note that there's been a long-standing shortage of psychiatrists specializing in treatment for kids. We have improved in our programs and our service providers, but that still remains a problem. Frequency of services are determined by an individual's treatment plan. When we shift to the environment that you'll hear a lot of going forward, behavioral health redesign, frequencies of visits by the disciplines as outlined in the bullets will be limited. In other words, the nurse's contact that may see an individual because they're taking medication that influences their diabetes, that nursing contact may be reduced from once a month to perhaps even once a quarter, just based again under redesign. The emphasis there is to encourage individuals to become linked with primary care providers. Prevention. Big word for a lot of different meanings. In the world of mental health, prevention means quite a few things. Our primary goal for prevention, and admittingly, our prevention services and dollars have been targeted for at-risk youth. Very little had been done outside of or in addition to our suicide prevention initiatives and strategies, which covers the lifespan. But prevention and early interventions are designed to have the greatest impact at decreasing the impact of mental health disorders for youth and adults, while developing strategies, coping skills, resiliencies. These risk factors are addressed through a whole host of varied programming, some of which are evidence-based, others casually are homegrown. But prevention is a vital component in our treatment continuum. A couple of examples of prevention programs, to name a few, is our early childhood mental health service program. You can see that early childhood services are deliberately designed for kids between the ages of birth and 6. With early childhood services, in partnership with Invest in Children, we have been able to provide funding for up to 5 agencies that are very, very specialized in their licensed clinicians for training specifically in the areas of dealing with our youngest citizens. These services include consultation, coaching, and home visiting, which is another unusual component. Due to many of the agency's budget cuts, home visiting or services provided in the home have become less in our treatment environment, for which we have many concerns around. And there are some pretty important factors that may play a role in the reduced evidence that we have seen for services being provided in the home. School-based services. Now, this is a program that has been longstanding in our community. Right now, school-based services are located in all of the Cleveland municipal schools. We are in most of the inner ring suburban schools. This model has received great compliments and has been recognized at the state level with both the Department of Education as well as the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Specialized programming in the classroom for grades K to 12. And the purpose here is to support healthy social emotional competencies that will lead to school success. That's the entire objective. In addition to the Mental Health in Schools program, we have partnered very closely with various school districts who have been acknowledged through the SAMHSA grant, which is called Project Aware. Those districts include Parma, Euclid, and Lakewood. Cleveland Heights is also a recipient of the Project Aware, but currently they have their own staff of social workers within their school system. Just real briefly, Project Aware is a grant from SAMHSA to promote youth mental health awareness among schools and communities and improve connections to services for school-age children. Project Aware is designed to help state and local education systems to increase awareness of the availability of mental health services and the early identification of possible mental health concerns. So that's very important to our continuum of care. Consultation is the style in which the services are provided. Consultation is not treatment. However, consultation services are provided by licensed clinicians, and that's important to continue to emphasize. And the clinicians and or consultation staff within the schools really uniquely provide a linkage or means in which teachers can speak with parents to explain further some of the behavioral issues that kids may display in the classroom. Oftentimes, teachers perhaps don't have the language to communicate that. And more importantly, there are some parents who don't know quite how to frame the question in order to better understand why a child's behavior is influencing their grades. So this consultation model, again, has been very successful and is 100% funded by Health and Human Service levy dollars. Let's talk about faith-based. And of course, my papers are out of order. Okay, here we go. Faith-based. This we have couched under prevention for a variety of reasons. In 2015, the Adams Board formed a faith-based outreach committee as a part of our board of directors. We also have 2 volunteers that participate in that committee discussion. The long purpose, since the change in the licensure rules for social workers and counselors that now allows the conversation to occur as a part of treatment, where do you draw your faith or your strength? How do you clear the hurdles in your life that is adding to your interest in using drugs as a means in which to escape? Or how do you stay on top of your symptoms due to your severe mental illness? How do you stay strong? Now that the licensed clinician can have those conversations as identified by individuals in treatment, we have provided a modest level of funding to explore just how effective this can be. Of the 5 agencies that we have funded through our faith-based initiative, 4 out of the 5 agencies have decided to stay with the prevention model of providing after-school programming, typically linked with the church, for kids who are identified at risk. Prevention activities include but not are limited to group discussions, pledges around I will tell someone if I see something, I'll tell someone. Some of those other pretty familiar campaigns that you hear through the media, as well as may have experienced with your own families through schools. The other programs for faith-based use the dollars on a limited basis to train their clinical staff on how to integrate and a person's identified faith or spirituality as a part of their treatment process. And then the last agency uniquely have deployed their staff chaplains. After a person has been intaked and has identified that they are strong in their faith, lean on their spirituality, whatever denomination that may be, the chaplain is then deployed to encourage that person to lean on their faith or their spirituality as a tools and confidence to comply with the treatment that's ahead of them. So we're excited about the faith-based initiative. We coined it under prevention, but admittingly, parts of it can be under treatment as well. Residential treatment and housing. Now, I could talk probably for 2 days in this area, both of what we currently have and what's to come. But for mental health, residential treatment environments is the most intensive form of treatment for individuals who are recently released from inpatient psychiatric units. We have fewer sites of residential treatments which are licensed by the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services than ever before, because we're actually employing our philosophy that persons living wherever they live can receive the needed treatment based on their treatment plan. So to be in a residential treatment environment that is staffed 24/7 by medical and care providers oftentimes has a regulated length of stay, I'll say. And that's typically no longer than 18 months. Well, now what we know about the brain disease of major and persistent mental illness is that there is no cure, but it certainly can be managed. So in that length of time, what the individuals should be learning are skills necessary to move into an environment that may not have 24/7 support, that may not have someone on site to prepare all of their meals, that may not have their laundry done for them on their behalf. But our programming is to take advantage of individuals living in these settings to teach them their independent living skills and be able to, based on their ability to advance beyond a residential care environment. We also know that there are individuals that may permanently need to live in these types of settings. And these settings continues to be the conversation between Adams boards throughout the state of Ohio and Department of Jobs and Family Services when we talk about nursing homes. In accordance to the Ohio Revised Code, the boards in Ohio are charged with the responsibility to ensure that individuals suffering from mental illness live in safe, decent, and affordable housing. Now think about that challenge. And think about the number of individuals that have been diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness. That challenge is very, very broad. But to get at that requirement, we currently have on staff, and have had, honestly, a person that we couch as our housing inspector. He's our compliance specialist. He's well-versed on building code, standard tenant landlord agreements, as well as the standards and licensure requirements for more intensive environments. So that's a big help. Oftentimes, this young man is the eyes and ears of a person as he's expecting their unit to tell us, look, Margaret doesn't look so great today. Or I couldn't get in the unit because they continued to be a hoarder. So these are all priceless interventions that board staff members are able to bring back, and then we follow up with the treating agency and or link with a provider. Now, something that we decided to try. Notice my tone has changed. Let me first speak a little bit about Residential Assistance Program. We have acronyms for everything in our world. This is RAP, RAP. There's another WRAP, and then there's another RAAPP. But for today's discussion, I'm talking about RAP, Residential Assistance Program Services. This was actually birthed out of the idea that individuals living in group homes, and the correct terminology or label for those environments are licensed adult care facilities, cannot afford to pay the cost of room, board, and personal care based on the SSI or supplemental income that they receive, which is now in excess of $760 some odd dollars. These environments cost $1,300 a month per person. The board has decided some time ago to create a way in which to offset the cost and to allow for some of the individuals' entitlements to remain as part of their own, I don't want to say allowance for adults, but money to have at their discretion. So we offset the cost by paying the difference. We currently have, hovers over a $2 million initiative, and this is primarily due to the increased costs that the state has applied to a like subsidy or voucher called Residential Supplemental Support, RSS. So our homes, we find we're in competition with the state's rates, and we have years ago tried to keep up with that, but we believe that we may need to re-examine our ability to sustain this growing need of support in our community. Okay, back to the change in my voice. And that's because I want to talk briefly about our transitional youth housing program. It took courage, real courage, as I'm sure most of you are parents in front of me, to build a congregate housing environment for individuals between the ages of 17 and 21, had a horrific history, oftentimes lengthy stays, multiple placements in our foster care environment, have been involved with behavioral health services as adolescents. These individuals may have also been returning from a brief incarceration at Ohio Department of Youth Services, and all of the above. The Adams Board owns a 5-unit apartment building that borders Euclid, the city of Euclid, and the city of Cleveland. Absolutely beautiful. And so what we decided to do with this building is to try our young adults in living in their own apartment. Level of support, we furnished it, provided them with their first month of food until entitlements were obtained. Well, we thought that it would be wise to have this as a co-ed unit. And perhaps I don't need to say more than that. Having young men and young women with no supervision within their units, while I won't say was disastrous, but taught us early on to decide which gender would be occupying this building. Right now, this unit is for men only. And the decision for that is because we're working on an environment for young women, and more importantly, in partnership, an eventual partnership with the YWCA, young women with children. So that's kind of the evolution of transitional youth housing that has me on 24-hour a day on call, and we're doing okay. One of the fortunate things about this housing is that the neighbor is awesome. She helped us to build a garden along the property line. She teaches the young adults gardening skills she has of her own, and she is very welcoming and has convinced the other neighbors along Lakeshore Avenue that this is what we should be supporting with our tax dollars. We're always building our program for employment and vocational services. Admittingly, we have had far more advancement with this with persons with mental illness than we have with individuals with substance use disorders. But you could see that the program that is a little more tweaked than traditional Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, or BVR, is because we have added the layer of expertise. How do you intervene with the individual who has the desire to work, but needs the skills to get there. We are not only talking about jobs of maintenance or cleaning kitchens, washing dishes, but we have data that supports that the average hourly rate is in excess of $14 an hour. Is that an independent living wage? No. But it certainly is on the path to secure employment that will pay higher. We have information that individuals have stayed or had job retentions in excess of over 1 year. Our greatest partners in this initiative include Recovery Resources, Magnolia Clubhouse, for example. The outcome data that we have to date shows that among the 2,170 individuals who received these services, 520 were placed in competitive employment. That's important to note. With an additional 275 ready to work. This brings our success rate to almost 40%. When you weigh that against national averages, we're doing pretty good. Remember, we're talking about an audience with a brain disease. Oftentimes, primary diagnosis includes schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, major depression. So those stats are very good. Other programs, real quickly, just to name a few, Representative Payee. Many times, clients who are linked with adult guardianship and or have proven that they don't have the ability to manage their own income, much like my 37-year-old daughter, who is not diagnosed, by the way, we decided that we need to make sure that we provide and continue to sustain financial support in financial management through a representative payee model. For years, we contracted with Consumer Protection Association, and just in the past few years, for reasons that are very obvious, was the fact that many clients were seeking the service and they just weren't able to keep up with the technology and the pace needed to accurately maintain their books, if you will. And they have taught us a lot about how to do this and what not to do. So we have a very small program for representative payee, whereby the agency receives the Social Security check and makes a budget, dispenses it according to the plan. Adult guardianship, we've been longstanding partners with Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry. We provide funding along with probate court to help grow this project and program, as a significant number of individuals are being presented in our probate court system in need of decision makers on their own behalf. And family caregivers are services that are typically provided through NAMI or Far West, and their support groups. They're informational groups. They're groups that talk about shared experiences within trying to care for their oftentimes adult child with severe and persistent mental illness. Crisis care intervention, another subject that I'm hopeful I'm not overwhelming you this afternoon, that I'll be invited back to talk specifically around program areas that are of particular interest to our citizens and to the council. But crisis services have been advertised for a number of years. You know the number by heart, 623-6888. It's a 24-hour line whereby licensed clinicians are responding to requests for intervention, either by phone or by outreach. This program also is being piloted, some aspects of it to accompany 2nd District police officers in the city of Cleveland for those frequent callers that are of nonviolent nature, but maybe those individuals, because of the voices, because of their illness, frequently contact the police. And there are a number of individuals, unfortunately, that are afflicted in that way. We have a psychiatric emergency room, one of the 2 in the state of Ohio. St. Vincent's Charity Hospital has been our partner since the inception of the psychiatric emergency room. They provide all types of social service supports in addition to the psychiatric assessment that they conduct regularly. The Stabilization Unit is up for discussion. This is located at 83rd in Detroit. It is currently used as a means in which individuals can be there for up to, I believe, 10 days if they had a sudden change in their psychotropic medication for their mental illness, to allow clinicians and medical staff to observe their reaction to the sudden change in medication. This more often happens for individuals who are released from prison or jail because the prescriber is not one of those in our community mental health agencies. We recently started, or resurrected, I should say, a children's response team as an arm of our crisis system. And again, the unique needs of kids in our world really does recommend that individuals who have experience in working with children and adolescents who may have severe emotional disturbances need to be a part of this outreach team. So again, we're talking about stabilization. We have a couple of beds, one of which is dedicated to DCFS, the other two Juvenile Court, and the Board of Developmental Disability for individuals, youth who need respite and or crisis intervention. A unique model that we're starting with the neighboring county is our autism project. Currently, our diagnosis has allowed for some aspects of on the autism spectrum to be treated by mental health professionals, but we've always partnered with the DD board. So we shared in those kinds of cases whereby funding may be considered, the expertise for psychiatric support in the mental health system, and the expertise for developmental disability clinically in the DD system. So this is not a new concept, it's just a newly identified project. System integration, I've already talked about. And again, for at-risk youth, the lead convener, for which the Adams Board is a partner, is our Family and Children First Council. So, what have I? Oh, outcomes. Hotline answered 10,694 calls. The percentages are there. We want to make sure when we're examining our crisis continuum that there be a greater number of outreach. Go see what's going on with the individual who's called when it's appropriate. So that's something that we're tracking. Another piece of our data source has been the utilization of the crisis stabilization beds. Crisis Stabilization Unit. And again, you'll see that 96% were also linked with services upon discharge. That's an indicator that we monitor very closely. Ancillary, I shouldn't call these ancillary, I apologize. In our treatment continuum or menu of services, of course, includes psychiatric services, but I want to mention a few evidence-based practice models that we have in our system. Assertive community treatment teams, ACT teams, are again an evidence-based practice model for vulnerable individuals, most often those who are homeless and or have chronic and persistent mental illness, which challenges their ability to meet appointments, to have independent skills, to live outside of a supervised setting. So these teams are critical to our system of care. Next to ACT teams are intensive case management. Same model approach, except they concentrate a lot on ensuring that a person maintains their housing obligations. The integrated dual disorder, IDDT, focuses on individuals who you'll often hear us call having a co-occurring disorder. Those are our citizens who are afflicted with mental illness and diagnosed substance use disorder, with the goal here to integrate treatment, for which we as a system have still some distance to go. Then you have CBT, motivational interviewing. We have, even more. The DBT is more often used for individuals who have been assessed to have very fluent criminogenic characteristics. So this is often used in prisons as well as those forensic programs that the board supports in the community. And then art therapy is recently funded by the Adams Board, and the therapeutic approach that's involved with art therapy has proven itself very successful. At times, if you have a chance to come over to our Ohio room, you'll see artwork constantly displayed by consumers in our system, most of whom have been involved with one of the various art therapy programs. So our outcomes as it relates to treatment. This data is from calendar year 16. You can see that retention in mental health treatment has been estimated on a national level to be around 53%. For Cuyahoga County, the treatment retention rate is closer to 72% as reported by our providers. 95% of clients are able to avoid psychiatric hospitalization, which is our most intensive environment and actually is the most costly resource for individuals. I'm going to continue to scroll down in the interest of time to make sure that we have time for questions. And I'll refer now to the table that shows the numbers of individuals served. And the point here I'd like to convey is that the note below indicates an additional nearly 22,000 children are served throughout prevention and school-based programs because those services are often provided in groups. They're also often not a part of our billing system because these are not, most of them are not Medicaid reimbursable services. So you'll see that we now have a outcomes management and program review system that has allowed us to glean these numbers, and we're looking forward to more data to come. We're moving into our substance use disorder. You'll notice the parallel in the outline of this presentation. You'll see that many of the same services are named the same. Many are very similar. The unique service within our substance use disorder menu of care is withdrawal management or detox services. We currently contract with 3 detox providers, Stella Maris, Rosary Hall, and Harbor Light with Salvation Army. But detox services usually are a very intense service of care that can range from a 5 to 7 day length of stay. Unfortunately, our data is now indicating that when a person is not at the stage of recovery that they want to follow through with their care, they usually leave detox on that 3rd day. As a result of that, and several others, we took a look at other ways in which to ensure that the comfort medication that helps to manage those very severe flu-like symptoms, which is indicative of withdrawal, can be managed in other ways while giving them information around treatment, while keeping them safe until they can access treatment and or decide to access treatment. So we've partnered with the Visiting Nurse Association for a pilot project. And here we have nurses making home visits and visiting our detox units or emergency rooms to offer this level of care and support to individuals who have either been revived by Narcan from an overdose and or have decided to leave detox early. So this is an amazing program. We're waiting with bated breath for outcomes of this program. So please allow me to come back and give you updates in this area. What we do know about detox among the 3 providers is that last year, 1,231 individuals were served or received detoxification services, and approximately 93% engaged in the treatment process, and 66% made the commitment to seek the next level of care, which means outpatient services. We have residential treatment, very similar environments as under mental health. We also have 2 forms of housing that the board supports. Let me go back just for a moment. For residential treatment for our substance use environments, The Institute for Mental Disease, has anyone heard of the IMD rule? That was a rule that dates back to, probably, I believe, the Kennedy administration in his effort to deinstitutionalize those, what were then called insane asylums. And the goal was very noteworthy. However, it prohibits environments to have in excess of 16 beds where they can bill Medicaid. That's currently being discussed at a federal level as well as at a state level. And that in particularly impacts our alcohol and other drug residential treatment environments. There are often campuses that have more beds than that. The licensure rules, if anyone's familiar with the Palmerdale campus, you know that the cottages have separate addresses. We were not allowed to have the cottages licensed as separate addresses. So these are kind of hurdles that we still have a strong voice and advocate for change and consideration so that we can maximize other Medicaid, other revenue streams to stretch our public dollars even further. So I just wanted to make note of that. Under substance use disorder, we are working closely with sober living environments who have forever, and many still do, are not interested in receiving public dollars at all. However, there is a handful that have expressed an interest in learning more. What does that mean? What are the reporting requirements? What does that do to my 50-year-old admission criteria that's solidly rooted in an AANA model? So just yesterday, we had nearly 60 individuals come to an orientation where we rolled out standards created by the Adams Board in conjunction with the National Association for Residential, the other R is? Recovery, thank you. National Association for Recovery Residents, that's it, NAR standards. And they received the information. They asked plenty of questions. They walked away curious. As an old school clinician, I read expressions, and I'm hopeful that many more will accept the idea of integrating their sober living environments with the years and years of success that they have had to allow for a person who has now decided in their course of treatment to be on methadone or Suboxone to live in their lovely sober housing units. The other category of housing is recovery, and those are the housing environments that are subject to the licensure standards or certification standards or standards, if you will, under the NAR criteria. Outpatient treatment, very similar to mental health. The uniqueness here is that we do have a very deliberate and long-standing paroled assertive community treatment team, much like a mental health act team. But here, this team is responsible for those individuals who are being released from prison. Those caseloads are usually a ratio of 1 to 5. Medication-assisted treatment. That's on the tip of tongues of many these days. And in part, it's because there still remains a level of controversy, if you will, in the administration of medication-assisted treatment to help with a person struggle with their addiction. Longest and the oldest is methadone. We have contract with one methadone clinic. There are a number in our county, but we decided to stay with community assessment, community action against addiction, CAAA. Again, those acronyms challenges me to say what they are sometimes. Apologize. But certainly CAAA is supporting the model of Vivitrol for their individuals. They house up to 8 gentlemen who were released from the criminal justice system. And it's a fairly new model for which we're watching very closely. Salvation Army, for example, has elected, because it's highly endorsed, but through our partnership with Drug Court, Vivitrol. What we do know is that Suboxone now has a street value. So there's some concern around the administration of the oral synthetic opiate called Suboxone. So that's the up-to-date around that. I want you all to please keep in mind that taking medication for opiate addiction is really like taking a medication for chronic medical conditions. It's not the same as substituting one addictive drug for another. When used properly, the medication does not create another addiction or a new addiction. It helps people manage addiction so that the benefits of recovery can be maintained, sustained lifelong as they have committed to their recovery journey. Some outcomes, just briefly, according again to the National Institutes of Health and our data that we receive from our contract agencies, of the 2,446 adults who receive substance abuse treatment services through our funded programs, the successful or average treatment completion rate hovers around 65%. Now, at times, even our board of directors feels, why isn't it 80%? Why isn't it 90%? Well, addiction is really very difficult because it is contingent upon an individual's stage of where they are in wanting to stop the use of illicit drugs. What we want to create is a system of care that allows that I think I'm ready to happen and have the funding to support a system that embraces that fourth or fifth time presenting at detox and then an IOP and then an OP. Some don't agree to go to residential treatment for very logical reasons. There's a significant number of individuals who seek publicly funded addiction services and support who work every day, who are the heads of households, who have responsibilities of families. To sacrifice that separation for, at a minimum, 90 days, some need more, is very stressful. So again, my efforts as the incoming CEO is to create an environment whereby they have options. Ambulatory detox is one, keeps a person at home. Again, these are familiar categories: at-risk youth for prevention. Primary prevention are the strategies we use for camps, recreational activities. We are now growing, which this information is in your packet. We're enhancing our prevention continuum to better address the adult population, particularly in the wake of the opiate and heroin crisis. We have some very successful prevention campaigns, both media and social media, for which I am learning a little bit about. But certainly these campaigns have been in excess of the past 3 or 4 years. We have a number of radio spots in both through social media as well. We have billboards, RTA placards, kiosks, handouts, songs that we've created, and the list goes on. We most often use messaging through Facebook and Twitter. And our billboards and RTA bus placards, as a partner of ours, have remained in place for months after the campaign has officially ended, with no additional dollars to the board. They're still playing many of our radio spots as well. Employment, I have to say, we are not doing that great a job for persons with substance use disorders. My goal is to network with existing workforce organizations that are aligned with criminal justice and or just have a work program to explore ways in which we can partner to enhance our participation with individuals that we mutually serve, seeking job training and actual employment. Criminal justice system is very huge for the Adams Board. We're longstanding partners with all of the court systems as well as the juvenile court system. I talked earlier about motivational interviewing and/or DBT. These are evidence-based practice programs that are oftentimes used on the outpatient basis with our contract agencies working in tandem with individuals who have been involved or recently released from the justice system. And here I talk about, again, Juvenile Court and Ohio Department of Youth Services. Peer takes on a different definition in the substance use environment. There is a credentialing process called chemical dependency counselor assistant, and our agencies have a significant number of individuals working in that capacity. We now have a statewide training program for peer support recovery coaches, for which we're encouraging individuals to go through that certification process. Dollars made available from the state are contingent upon a peer recovery coach being certified. So it is a marvelous, marvelous initiative. We are opening a new consumer operated program building on West 117th near Berea Road. And that building will truly be reflective of activities for persons struggling with addiction and mental illness. And here are some numbers. There was a total in calendar year 16, as reported by our agencies, of 2,803 individuals received addiction treatment and recovery support services. The cost for all that I've illustrated comes to a modest $54,148,834. This is all made possible through the generous $39 million that has been afforded to the Adams Board for the second consecutive budget term of $39 million. We deeply appreciate the allocation from the Health and Human Service levy dollars. We also want to brag about the fact that we view the Adams Board and our contract providers as the experts when it comes to mental health and addiction treatment. So any new programs and services, please consider the Adams Board as the lead agency, and we will continue our expand our partnerships to make sure that those mutually served citizens of Cuyahoga County, even those too young to vote, receive the appropriate level of care to help them with their recovery. I will take any questions that you may have.
All right. Very well done. I started to give you a break somewhere along there. You could have
I'm
took
used
it.
to this.
Okay. Well, we will start with just a couple questions for me. I've kind of wrote them on each slide, so
Okay.
I'll refer back to a page. First one to open up to the president to see if he had any questions in regards to.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I just want to say congratulations and
Thank you.
for your new position. I know you've been doing this work a long time, and I know, as everybody in Greater Cleveland does, that you've got very big shoes to fill. But we're pleased to have you with us today. And I know from my experience here on the county council that it's not. A Cuyahoga County without the Adams Board is inconceivable, and it's not possible to even quantify the work that the Adams Board does in a way that people can understand it unless they've really had time to interact with the Adams Board and really see the incredible work that's done by the Adams Board and how many times we have to find ourselves coming to the Adams Board because we need help from the Adams Board in order to make things happen here. And so I just want to thank you for your work, your life's work, and look forward to working with you in this new capacity as the CEO of Adams Board.
Thank you, Councilman Brady.
CEO Harper, on page 3.
Yes, ma'am.
Prevention under mental health, you stated that providing services in the homes have been a challenge. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. Page, I'm on 4. Let me go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our booklet might not match up with the.
It should. Page 3, providing services in the home. I could just speak from it in generality. What we have found is that for particularly direct service providers, you can only imagine that we have significant turnover and a very challenging job with minimal pay. Many of the staff are recent graduates. Some, majority are now licensed, either LSW or LISW. And what the challenge has been is really, in a few words, is just safety. We're finding that our case managers who are being deployed to unfamiliar areas and or unfamiliar individuals, there's been few incidents of concerns, but our agency directors have voiced concerns overall. In our current billing environment, if we deploy 2 workers, one of them will not get paid for the services that are provided. So that gives a budgetary challenge for the agency. So it's a variety of things. We have a very transient population for those who suffer with mental illness. Recently, I visited some of the more established or recently established homeless tents. One is off of Pearl Road. And I tell you, the conditions in which the individuals are living is just, it just is deplorable, and it breaks your heart. Some have been longstanding homeless individuals who prefer that culture above shelter and or permanent housing. So the outreach component has lessened unless they go out in teams. But for those familiar clients, there's less of a concern around safety. So that's, to my awareness, is the primary reason.
Okay, well, thank you. Slide 6, still on page 3 of the booklet.
Okay.
My colleagues. Prevention under mental health. You had talked about the SAMHSA grant.
Yes.
Project Aware,
Yes.
which is new to me. And you mentioned 3 cities, Parma, Euclid, I didn't catch the third,
Lakewood.
Lakewood.
Cleveland Heights was also a recipient, but not one that the board is actively involved in.
Okay, so my kind of concern is, and I know it's a grant and I know what we're doing and it's a pilot, but it's more than just those 3 or 4 cities that need help. So that's always my mantra, like even with education, we have a great motto in Beechwood schools. Why aren't we just doing it overall? Why aren't we caring about our kids and our adults that have these issues? So I just wanted to bring that up. I have many others, but I'll weed in and out. Next, I'll open it up to Councilman Tuma.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that. I want to thank you for being here this afternoon.
And nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you, too. I had the opportunity not too long ago to get out to the Adams Board, but I think you were the only one outside the building that day.
was.
But
I
we finally get to meet,
apologize.
so it's good, though. Appreciate that. Appreciate all the hard work you folks do. It's just area of mental health and addiction. It's just such a wieldy, large net that's cast over so many things. Having said that, are there any areas of concern regarding duplication of services? In going back and looking to see, we used to do X, Y, and Z for this particular issue, and then you find yourself, going full circle and saying, "Oh, geez, we're doing the same thing." Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yes, Madam Chair, to Councilman Tuma. My answer is probably twofold and probably a little more long-winded than you had hoped. But I have to brag upon our longstanding collaborations. And in part of those various forums, we have candid discussions about, so what is your team doing, starting point, and what is your team doing, Applewood or Achievement Centers. So that's just a small example as to where we talk about the services that may be delivered under the same title, case management, child-focused, client-centered, but again, with fear of that duplication. I will say that I was very excited to be now the chair of the planning committee for, as the courts and the jails analyze what it is that the services are needed for our second largest psychiatric hospital called County Jail. And with the sequential mapping exercise that we were engaged in a couple of weeks ago for a day and a half, it was quite telling that there are gaps in services needed, but we also may witness some duplication in that area. So we talk about it through collaborative discussions. We have quarterly collaboration meetings with the Department of Children and Family Services, with the Board of Developmental Disability, Juvenile Court, and others that I'm certainly not remembering at this moment.
Okay. If I could continue, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing, the Adams Board in the next year or two?
Well, the greatest challenge in front of us is the opioid and heroin crisis. And while we continue to talk about the numbers of deaths, what can we do to slow that, decrease that number down? So the analysis and energy is being pumped into prevention, early intervention, public education, forum opportunities, getting the word out about the harm of using illicit drugs, as well as being able to establish resource information that may be available in other states that we're researching. How do we best do this? One thing I forgot to mention was the work that we're doing with various police departments and quick response teams, again, as a result of the heroin crisis. And I probably need to develop a model in tandem with Mr. Eckhart that addresses the needs of our first responders in terms of seeing individuals, some having been revived, others not so much. But anyway, I got off topic. The greatest need is to get ahead of the heroin crisis. Second to that is to build a continuum of care, or we used to be called a safety net when I started in 1988. And now that net looks like a hammock just hanging with two strings in the middle of two trees. We have to build that safety net back up. It means something very different in our current behavioral health environment than it did when I started blue years ago. But now it is something that is a challenge because of not just funding, but the availability in our workforce. They have the talent of the staff within our agencies to have shared visions within the community, and that list could go on.
Thank you. How do you challenge, I guess maybe like old stereotypes of people with addiction, or hey, what do you say to the individual out there who says, not my problem, or why are we using taxpayer funding on this, or like for example, you said, it might not be the first or second time that people have difficulty embracing. They say, okay, the person has a problem. Fourth, fifth, sixth time in or through a program or seeking assistance. What do you say to folks who are on the opposite side of the spectrum and might not be so understanding? Mm-hmm. What do you say to that?
Well, I've said many things over the years, and if given the opportunity, I'd like to share as our number one priority combating stigma. That is going to be a lifelong professional initiative for all of those involved in the behavioral health system. It never goes away. It will likely never goes away, like other isms in our world. But certainly what I say to them is that it's a brain disease, and that oftentimes I find myself approaching it as a science, because it's a little more accepting than to hear that once that they have craved the physiological craving of the drug, then they take a little different tone. Yeah. I'm still working very hard around the criminality of individuals who are now addicts. That's a very different population than those who sell and poison our citizens.
Right. Okay, I appreciate your comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Brown, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we were on the prevention mental health, we touched on the faith-based services, and you said that you have 5 agencies that were funded. Can you tell us those 5 agencies?
I certainly can. I certainly will try. Trinity Ministry, NAMI, Church in South Euclid under Reverend Pastor Benjamin Franklin, who works closely with the court, for which we're going to start a quick response team there. That was more than what you asked for.
No, that's good.
Hispanic Umadop, Ohio Guidestone, What is my count up to? Please say.
You've got
5.
your 5. So one of them, yeah. So one you said 4 of the 5 were staying with the model, and I guess it's not the one that doesn't is not relevant. But I was curious as to which 5 were funded, and then you talked a little bit about the home and the housing units where it has transferred from to unisex. From co-ed to unisex. So,
Yes.
how many rooms and people are housed? The gentlemen are housed there.
It is a 5-suiter apartment building, brick. And they are actually 1 bedrooms. They're not, in my days, having an SR or a single room occupant was pretty good. But these are literal 1 bedrooms with small kitchens.
Oh, wow, very nice. And so the other question that I have is, with such an outstanding resource and a large pool of people that I would imagine would want to live in such an environment, what is the selection process?
We actually have a written criteria that we provided to our child serving agencies along with our partners who serve children, DCFS, DD, Juvenile Court. And primarily the admission criteria is right now for youth diagnosed with severe emotional disturbances, that these youth, pretty much that's the only criteria. We have, because of the zoning, we cannot accept sex offenders, and that's the only exclusion that I'm aware of.
Okay, and it's an 18 to 25-year-old unit as
I
far
have one
as
17-year-old
okay.
through guardianship.
And then the other gentleman, as they're approaching age 25, is there a transition or some type of program, bridge building program in place for them to transition out of that into a separate housing?
Actually, Councilwoman Brown, that transition process starts upon admission.
Okay.
And that may also sound cliche, but it certainly is what we're expecting as part of the program, is that you begin to identify what are the areas that the youth needs the most life skills building in. You'd be surprised, 2 of the young men there have gone through some type of culinary training while at ODYS, Ohio Department of Youth Services. And as a result, which got to be a little bit of a problem, honestly, they started cooking for everyone else. And then we noticed that the neighbors were coming. And so,
Nice summary.
you don't want to encourage a person to build on their strength, but we can't feed the neighborhood. So
with that in mind, Ms. Harper, do they have a limited time that they are there? I guess worst case scenario, someone could be there from 17 to 25, or is this like a year or 2 year? Is there a statute for services?
Well, actually, what we have in the pilot is to assess their ability to move to an independent or permanent housing every 6 months. And that's in partnership with their involved treatment agency.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question that I have is, you touched on the peer support and that certification that they go through in order to become peer counselors. Are they paid upon, or is that voluntary?
For which, the training
For
or
to become a peer counselor?
are they paid?
Paid as counselors, or
When
once they
they're
get that
integrated
training?
within an agency, absolutely.
Okay.
We actually have funded, 3 programs that the peer supporters are paid staff within the agencies. Not all are currently certified because that's a relatively new, but they're all going through the process. My last count, I believe that we have 23, don't quote me on that, 20-something certified peer recovery coaches in Cuyahoga County. We actually offer the training at the Adams Board, so we're really encouraging that certification.
Thank you, Chief Harper.
Valeria.
All right, I just want to follow up a little bit on those questions. So my mantra is always being equitable and fair. So can you let us know what the young women, you mentioned YWCA, so the women that had to move out, do we have something comparable to this meal program for the women?
Not yet, Councilwoman Conwell. And that's something that we're gravely concerned about, particularly as we're finding, even among our homeless transient population, young mothers with children not currently in their custody, but certainly have a plan for reunification. So no, we do not currently. And if I could, I was definitely remiss in mentioning, as I'm staring in the eyes of one of our strongest advocates to develop this program, Councilwoman Conwell, is our Seasons of Hope. We have, and I hate to couch it as a result of the number of deaths in the hands of the now convicted Anthony Sowell, we recognize the need that women who are addicted will roam streets and probably do everything imaginable, unfortunately, to have their next high. As a result of that, we worked hard with Third Federal Bank to identify some location for which we can develop a very modest program to take these women off the street. Third Federal gave us 5 years old when they gave it to us? And I won't go into, because I might sound more envious than professional, fully furnished with stainless steel appliances, house on the east side. And this house is not housing, but what it is, we have fabulous outreach workers that now work for Catholic Charity. In the inception of the program, we worked with Hitchcock Center for Women. And they comb the streets at all hours of the night and bring women back. It's a popular location that Cleveland police bring women to this home. And while there are no beds, there's the world's most comfortable furniture, recliners. The women have an opportunity to have a hot meal, to wash their clothes while they change into scrubs, take a shower. They can come back 100 times if they want to. The doors are open. We do have security on site because oftentimes these same women are victims of domestic violence. So thank you for your advocacy in helping materialize that house. We are working right now for a West Side location, still with Third Federal, in hopes that they will give us something very comparable, maybe larger, on the West Side as well.
All right, I'd like to open it to Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you, and
Then
I
Miller.
would like to repeat, I appreciate the hard work. I'm not really sure where to start in some of these questions, but I'll start with a few. I guess I would ask you to define perhaps the difference between mental health and mental illness, if you would mind.
Nice to meet you as well, Councilwoman Baker. Valeria's definition of mental health is not necessarily carrying a diagnosis of severe and persistent. That can be those through, the best example at times we think of are episodic depression, grief, loss of a loved one, that time of year where you become sad. That's very different than major depression disorder, which is limiting in your activities, your inability to work, your inability to socialize and engage. Oftentimes, Councilwoman Baker, they're used interchangeably.
Right.
So that's why my presentation, I hope I was very deliberate in emphasizing severe and persistent mental illness, which are the more chronic, more severe, more difficult to treat, the schizophrenia, schizoaffective.
Right, and I guess that's why I asked that, because I see in the first several slides, you concentrate more on the mental health, but the mental health that you're concentrating on is early childhood mental health, which does not mean that they have mental illness.
Correct.
The school-based services doesn't necessarily mean it's to support healthy social emotional competencies that yield academic success. That too is not a mental illness.
Correct.
So I guess, I would ask, given that we have such limited resources with huge unlimited needs, these are pretty big goals that you have set forth outside of the mental illness and drug addiction or substance abuse. So I guess asking that, do you think that we have the kind of resources to take care of the entire broad scope that you've identified here today? Given especially since we have the opioid crisis that seems to be also very difficult to get under control.
I would say no, that we don't have, but I will brag about how smart we've become with the dollars that we do have. I would also say that because of the immediate ramp up in services and additional programming in response to the heroin crisis, through $250,000 from the county exec, $250,000 from Mayor Frank Jackson, and then the Adams Board contributed just shy of $1 million to bring online, for example, an additional 113 beds. My question to Valeria is now, how do we sustain those beds that we urgently ramped up to meet a very necessary community need? So my answer is no.
Mm-hmm. I guess to continue on that then, when we talk about early childhood mental health, and mental health really not being mental illness, but mental health, and school-based, how involved are we with the family structure? Because that family is responsible for those children from 0 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
And even though they're past the age of 6 and are in the school's environment, it really does always go back to the family. So how do you kind of hopefully pass the baton to the family to maintain what it is that needs to be done to take care of that child?
I will say that we have the greatest success in our early childhood programs in just that scenario. Parent involvement is essential through all aspects of care provided to children, and we have a pretty okay ratio of parent involvement, very similar, and it's really it mirrors the parent involvement for each of the schools that we're in. And we all know that some districts struggle with parent involvement. So we do have our parents involved in the programs that we are currently funded. We must. We, just to name one for early childhood, infant massage. And there's a CD available through Achievement Center, and it works. I tried it with my daughter and my grandson. But it's a calming way for both the mother and the child to better understand, while informing a parent that crying is a part of communication for infants, what to do and some other techniques to help settle the crying or shorten the amount of time an infant is crying, just as an example. It's ironic, Councilwoman Baker, that we're talking in this way. I asked my team member who's over our child and adolescent programming for the board, why do we have mental health in early childhood? Why do we have mental health in school-based? Well, I'm in error. School-based is now coined as school-based services. And early childhood is still early childhood mental health, pending more conversations with Invest in Children as a real generous partner in funding, and both programmatically. So.
Right, and I would, if I may continue, given the months that I've been here, seems to be an enormous amount of funding that outside of the Adams Board, we also put towards early childhood and other funding ways, education, all of that. How do you, as mentioned earlier, separate and make sure we're not redundant in some of the services that not so much within your scope, but outside the scope of others also making those same interventions? And I would add that last week, I believe it was last week, maybe it was even earlier this week, Job and Family Services through the HHS strategy plan also had an enormous amount of intervention, whether it's school-related or infant-related, family services. How do you not duplicate the services when there's so many out there trying to do what they can to help people?
There's no question, Councilwoman Baker, that we're serving a similar audience. I would say that the uniqueness in the services that are provided through the funding of the Adams Board more often have licensed clinicians and certified in behavioral health. That may not always be the case in settings such as Department of Children and Family Services. As an example, as child welfare is not designed to be, at least my understanding, to be the experts when it comes to behavioral health. That's why we partner and collaborate with those systems. We partner and collaborate with Starting Point as a large vehicle in our county for child daycare centers, child-based services. So I have to revert back to my answer of collaboration to become familiar with those partner agencies' service delivery models. And if tweaking is necessary, that's what we'll do as a group.
Okay, let me just continue here with some of the notes I wrote. I think it's pretty wide understood that the most vulnerable for poverty are single mothers, those that have 1, 2, 3 children, but are the sole responsible person for their children. I guess I would ask why, given that context, why we wouldn't give the priority, as we have on page 5 with the residential assistant program, that we wouldn't put mothers and their children in that nice facility and the men to the YMCA. Why was that thought process not more given to mothers who are struggling with children?
Councilwoman Baker, there has been very lengthy conversations with regards to services to women, particularly young women. And in our system of care currently, the majority of women that have children are the head of the household. So with that said, the qualifying criteria for these types of housing support is that you have a diagnosable mental illness and or addiction. And we know that many women meet that criteria. But in addition to that, we are seeking similar programming. Again, I always hate to go back to when I was in direct service, but I provided training to juvenile court judges called I'll take 10 of your boys if you take 2 of my girls. Right. And what that actually means is that women, clinically speaking, girls, are more difficult to provide the level of support in the ratio and staffing patterns that we can afford. I hope that's politically correct.
So is the answer then to the question of why we wouldn't give mothers with children the more sustainable place to live because they're more costly?
Well, no, the answer to that is that we currently don't have the environments to accommodate women with their children, with the exception of Hitchcock Center for Women, that has a special funding stream for women with children. That's outside of our Health and Human Service dollars. But again, those women have to have a severe addiction, have gone through the intensive program, have their children with them. I think they can have up to 3 children, I believe, in that environment. It is a very short-term option. It is not permanent housing. In working with the Office of Homeless Services, we are looking at developing more permanent supportive housing for families. And I believe that in the upcoming years, you'll see units that have supportive services on site to respond to your questions around family housing.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Councilman Miller?
Madam Chair, Ms. Harper, first I'd like to congratulate you on this very prestigious appointment, and I believe that the Adams Board is one of the most important agencies in Cuyahoga County whose success is very closely related to the overall health and well-being of the people of Cuyahoga County. So it's very important work. And
thank you, Councilman Miller.
My first question is, when you talked about the employment for people with substance abuse, and you said it's an area where we're not doing well, and I appreciate the honesty. And is the not doing well relate to not having programs and services, or does it relate to you're having programs and services, but you're not having a very good success rate?
Councilman Miller, it is more related to having one program through Catholic Charities at this time in comparison to a model for various funding sources to support vocational employment programming for persons with severe and persistent mental illness.
And in this area, are you doing work to program with the many agencies in and around Cuyahoga County that do work on employment so that people with addiction problems can take advantage of those outside programs?
Yes, Councilman Miller. I recently became the chair of the Reentry Leadership Coalition along with Judge KJ Montgomery. I became the chair of that committee because I missed a meeting. But anyway, surrounded by a number of towards employment, workforce development types individuals who work with Oriana House, North Star. While I'm familiar with those programs and projects, I am going to really begin a more of a collaborative, very deliberate discussion, and workforce development is one of those areas on my list.
Great, that's important. I'm wondering where we currently stand as to whether people who have severe and persistent mental illnesses and people who have addiction disorders, whether they're promptly able to get treatment when they're ready and willing to do so, or whether there's waiting lists and delays and difficulties in getting treatment.
Councilman Miller, you're absolutely correct. In our treatment programs, there are wait lists. In our detox program, because of the authorization, I won't say lonely because, but an added process of authorizing admissions has helped significantly to eliminate or limit the wait list for detoxification services. One of the goals that I had that I shared with our board of directors during the four-part interview process was that we need to try to develop a central access point for care. How do we do that? We have a number of examples that we could talk about, most of which requires a pretty significant one-time investment in technology, as well as to shift some of our workforce that are responsible currently in our IT departments within our agencies. So the answer is yes, we have long wait lists. We're responsible to report those wait lists to the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. They also are beginning to monitor the movement, as well as what happens when a person is on a wait list. Well, I have an idea. Why not employ some peer recovery coaches to pair up with those individuals while they're waiting to access treatment? Relatively inexpensive initiative that we believe will go a great distance.
Okay, great. Regarding the opiate crisis, the last I saw, the numbers were continuing to get worse, and that's despite the very strong, extensive, dedicated, hard work of many, many people across many different fields in our community. And my question is, do you have any sense of what we could do that we're not yet doing to help move the needle back in the right direction?
I am working with a number of great minds to try to answer that question honestly, Councilman Miller. I today don't have a instant answer in response to that. But what I would advocate for is time to report back to this committee around some of the new initiatives that we put in place to help combat the opioid and heroin crisis.
For your consideration, the idea that I have, and I have no sense of whether it's the answer or part of the answer, but I think a much deeper grassroots effort through neighborhood organizations and churches might help. So,
That initiative has already started, led by the Adams Board, Councilman Miller, in several different ways.
Good.
Thank you.
You mentioned, Ms. Harper, Madam Chair to Ms. Harper, about sex offenders. And the last word I had is that sex offenders are very difficult to treat. And the question I have is whether that remains the case or whether recent advances in treatment have resulted in us developing treatment programs for sex offenders that have decent success rates.
Councilman Miller, it's my understanding with my long tenure in the behavioral health field is that the sex offenders who are not sentenced are not as difficult to treat as a person, no more difficult to treat, I should say, excuse me, than a person with severe and persistent mental illness. Now, again, I did make the clear distinction between those individuals who are sentenced because of their offense and diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, and those who may have had a criminal record involving a sexual assault. So the treatment approach and modality, to my awareness, is not that vastly different. Our problem as a community is that the restrictions in where a person can live has aided in our challenge in finding intensive treatment environments for these individuals. For example, we have a treatment site for those with mental illness on Franklin Avenue, 81st. We have been there for years and years and years, and that was the environment where the majority of those sentenced through court to a residential treatment site because of the offense of sexual assault. And the community knew the population because we did a very deliberate job of saying who were in those facilities. A daycare center moved in just yards away. How that happened, we don't know. We had to urgently move and transition those individuals. Some were able to return to their family members as a result of the treatment that they had received.
Madam Chair, Ms. Harper, are you a believer in the importance of the idea that mental health and health should no longer be seen as separate categories, but should be seen as integrated and part of a whole? And if you believe that, how much progress do you think we've made in getting toward that perspective?
Strictly Valeria Harper's opinion, parity is alongside of stigma in my mind. I don't think we've reached parity in any way, shape, or form. I'm anxious to see that with the shift in our delivery system, with a managed care organization now also embracing behavioral health, will that change? That certainly was one of the marketing points that was made years ago when this idea and concept was rolled down throughout the state. So does parity occur? Not in the opinion of Valeria. Now, Valeria, as the team leader for the Adams Board, hearing from families, parity has not occurred.
And I would suggest that even parity itself is not enough. I mean, I think the earlier versions of parity were more like the separate but equal concept of schools some many decades ago, where what we need to get to is that mental health and physical health are both part of health and have to be dealt with in an integrated fashion. So I think we do have a ways to go.
I could not agree more, Councilman Miller, and thank you for your continuous and tireless support of the Adams Board.
And one final question, and that's as to your sense of to what extent there are disparities in our level of mental health in our population by race, and which I believe there are, and to the extent that that exists, what are we doing about it, and what can we do about it?
Before the Adams Board merged with the former Addis Board, one of the criteria for funding consideration from the mental health side was to have the identification based on the demographics of the staff within our proposed contract agency environments. And overwhelmingly, there was an obvious lack of individuals of color in any managerial role per se in the majority, if not all, of our agencies. That has not changed a lot. There have been the closure of 2 minority-led agencies because of reasons that were cast down from the state of Ohio. But to that point, I think that disparity still occurs, not so much so from the provider's intentional provision of services, but I think that what's ongoing is familiarity around how a person's culture must be weighted in the treatment process. And so I'm not sure that at all times that happens. Hearing back from clients that present complaints at the board, for example, so this is not something that I'm guessing around, but disparity in treatment I've never felt was anything that was deliberate. Many clients feel that they have a greater comfort level if their therapist looks more like them. That's both in race and gender.
Madam Chair, Ms. Harper, to follow up on that, you talked about disparities within the organizations and disparities in the treatment. But do you feel that there are disparities within the population at large because of underlying economic and social conditions?
Councilman Miller, my experience points to quite the opposite. I've been a longstanding Clevelander. Actually, I was born here. And one of the things that I know more and more often happens is the generosity of our community. And so I don't feel that the community at large, when it comes to disparity related to a person's disability, is obvious, at least not in my mind. What I do think is that the lack of education, just with the other isms in our world, fuels any levels of disparity and discrimination. So in that vein, it points to the Adams Board doing a much more aggressive public awareness and education initiative beyond what we've been able to do at this point to inform the community and the other citizens of Cuyahoga County that mental illness is treatable and people do recover, as well as addiction.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
President Brady.
Thank you. I wanted to double down a little bit on Councilman Miller's question about opiates, and heard your answer. So just wanted you to know that we're looking for, the best suggestions that are out there, that you see out there, what you think is working, what you think is not working, how you think we can help, in regard to that as we go forward, and to sort of set it aside. You've been asked questions that it's almost, you would have to have the answers to almost every problem in the world to over the last 30 minutes, it seems to me. But I'm going to set that one aside as a big crisis that we're in, and one that we need help understanding. Even though we read everything, and there's plenty to read, and there's plenty to hear, and there's, you hear it every day if you're listening. But I want you to know we are listening, and we want to know what we can actually realistically and practically try to do to make an impact. So that's a statement. I have a meeting I have to go to. I want you to know that I'm leaving because I have to go to this other meeting, and not to be disrespectful. And thank you for coming today, and Good to see you.
And thank you, Councilman Brady, and we certainly do appreciate your support constantly. We don't know all the answers yet, but I'm welcoming the invitation to share with you ideas as a community we try to talk about slowing down this crisis, and with the goal of hopefully having it at a manageable, if at all, choice in terms of drug use. Thank you so much.
Valeria, I'm learning. Slide 26 and page 13 for my colleagues. Just to,
Sorry about that.
it was the detoxification withdrawal management.
Okay.
When was that pilot started?
The ambulatory, I'm going to turn to Frank. June 1st of this year.
Oh, okay, very new then.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. And so, you touched on the IDM rule. What does the IDM stand for?
IMD is Institute for Mental Disease. That's how old this rule is, using that kind of language.
All right. And then, one final thing in terms of, I guess, suggestion, slide 27 for the prevention substance abuse disorder. You do a host of different types of advertising, maybe added to Instagram if you can. I don't know how to work those things, but
I'm sorry?
Instagram. That's
I'll
where a
have
lot
to turn
of
to,
yeah, that's where a lot of young
and Scott
people
will tell
are
me
on
what Instagram is on the drive home, but Scott?
Yeah.
Yes, we're ramping up our social media to
Yeah. You won't find me on it, but you know, there's a lot of young people I know like that over Facebook. So maybe we can get the message out, and that help is there. I want to open up to my colleagues. Any final things before we let Valeria take a break? All right. Well, we want to again thank you, and we can talk over the. I know you have probably you've been to 53 places. You probably got another 20. You still got to go. But sometime in this, before the year ends, let's sit down and see what we can actually delve a little deeper in, what you feel needs to be delved in a little deeper here at this committee.
And thank you for that invitation, Councilwoman Conwell. My hope is to be invited back to this committee where we can talk program, service, initiative, ideas specific, that we can present data, we can present costs, we can share ideas, exchange ideas, just so that I have the opportunity to address this committee going forward would definitely be appreciated.
Okay, and maybe that program service data will kind of intertwine with some of your new initiatives that you want. All right. All right, well, thank you again.
Well, thank you, and thank you all, members of the committee. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Any miscellaneous business from anyone? All right. Madam Clerk, anyone here to speak unrelated to the agenda?
Yes, Ms. Liu.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First, I would also like to offer my own personal congratulations to Ms. Harper for her great new job, because Mr. Donahan had a good vision. And now we can see that Ms. Harper will lead Adams Board to fight all the new challenges and help all the residents in the county. And I think this prediction of mine will come out exactly right, and which actually this presentation will show that. And I'm actually very excited about it, sorry. However, some of the important programs in this presentations, I believe from my past 2-3 years attending Adams Board meeting along with all other informational or informative meetings, I know some of these programs actually can help the people in the shelter, doesn't matter which one right now. However, these programs are very difficult to be reached by shelter residents, doesn't matter which shelter we are talking about here. So I hope with Ms. Harper's help, and I hope all the homeless residents in the shelters will be able to receive some of these services, which actually will help them speed up their own recovery from all kinds of traumas, and that actually will prepare them better for the housing in the future they will receive. On the other hand, the presentation last week about the HSA strategy planning, sorry, I probably got the name wrong, but that one also presents some of the good points, same thing. People in the shelters, they will never be able to reach. When they put out a survey to collect information from all the county residents, I got the opportunity, I answered the survey. The content of the survey, the design was only specifically to go with county proposals. So not all of those questions could really be interpreted instantly while people facing the computer trying to answer questions. So some of the things became kind of ambiguous. Some of the things actually are not really on the scope for people's daily life. So I wish if you get a chance, please review those questions. I'm not saying the county's goals are not good. It's just the way they presented that in the surveys are not very helpful for all the residents in the county to understand what we actually want to reach. It's just a data we want to reach it to look good, or actually they will transform into practical, useful services to benefit everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, anyone else?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, this meeting is adjourned.